With the recent release of the Project 1999 Green server, I am sure a big part of the experience for a lot of players is to acquire some of the many rare and wonderful items that will be either nerfed or removed in the future of the server. These are items that will exponentially grow in value over time due to the functionality that they can provide, or some will purely be used for serious e-swag in the future. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to count down the top 10 of my favourite nerfed and removed items from the EverQuest trilogy. Number 10. The Moss-Covered Twig. Over in the Frontier Mountains there is a rare Yeti named Bugug. For the first few months of Kunark, Bugug can drop the Moss-Covered Twig. Did you ever want to channel your inner fist of the North Star? Well, with the Moss-Covered Twig you can. This weapon only has 3 points of damage. However, what it lacks in the damage department, it more than makes up for in speed. It has a delay of 10. Imagine playing a monk with epic fists that are 9 damage, 16 delay, and then having an offhand sporting a 10 delay. Did someone say... To be honest, I don't actually know the practicality of this weapon for a monk in terms of damage. It is offhand only, so I don't believe that weapon damage bonus applies to it. The best it's probably going to do is be a beast for pushing mobs in terms of interrupting their casting, but I mean epic monks using both fists do that anyway. I am sure warriors could probably get some use out of it in terms of threat generation. An interesting thing to note on P99 is it does say paladins and shadow knights can wield this weapon regardless of it being offhand only. I have no idea how that would actually function, because those classes do not have the dual wield skill, so I don't even think they'd even be able to equip it. And even if they could, without dual wield, would it even swing? I don't know. Regardless of all this, I still think it is a very fascinating weapon, and I would love to get my hands on one. The Moss-Covered Twig is replaced with the Moss-Covered Branch a few months into the release of the Kunark expansion. Number 9. The Thex Dagger. The Thex Dagger is a nice little item that gets removed very early on in this game's life. Anyone who's familiar with High Keep has probably encountered Princess Lenya before. Apart from being a very nice little Star Wars reference, she was also the centre of a short quest that rewarded the Thex Dagger. The spawning mechanics in this quest were very buggy, requiring some strict timing to hand it in successfully. Now, whether because of these bugs in the quest, or the fact that the Thex Dagger can be worn in the range slot and grants 50 disease resist, the quest was eventually changed and the Thex Dagger was no longer rewarded. Knowledge of this item on blue 10 years ago was probably very limited. That, mixed in with the fact that it was nerfed 10 years ago, means that the Thex Daggers on blue are worth quite a bit of money. I imagine there aren't many of them left in circulation. Currently on green, the knowledge of this item is not like it was 10 years ago. Everyone knows about the Thex Dagger now. There are hundreds of players that are queuing up to farm Thex Daggers. I imagine a lot of these people are hoping to make money in the future, but by the looks of it, the daggers will be flooded onto green server on a scale that blue never saw, making their value potentially never reach anything significant for quite a long time, if ever at all. Regardless of this, it's still definitely a nice little item to have. 50 disease resist is nothing to sneeze at in a single slot, especially in Classic. Number 8. The Locket of Escape. This item drops in the Temple of Droga off of Chief Rockgus himself. Now, what is the Locket of Escape, you might ask? It's not one of the most known about items, and it might not seem that special to some people, but it certainly is a very special item. The locket holds a single charge of Bind Affinity, which to casters is probably no big deal at all. But to us melee peasants, this item allows us to place our bind point in some seriously advantageous positions throughout the game. This item gets removed from the loot table about a month into the release of Kunark. Any of the remaining lockets stay in the game unaffected. Even though the locket only has a single charge, just like most other items with limited charges, it can be recharged. How do you recharge an item, you might ask? Well, by keeping one of the desired items at full charge, you can sell the fully charged item to a vendor. Vendors will only ever have a single inventory slot for an item, whether it's stackable or not. What this means is that whatever number of charges the initial item sold to the vendor has, all of the following items sold will then have that initial amount of charge when bought back. For lore items such as the Locket, this does require multiple players having the item. Player with the fully charged item sells their Locket to the vendor, and then the player with the depleted item sells their Locket to the vendor. Each player will then buy back a fully charged Locket. Very simple. Now when you're doing this for simple items such as root nets or Spirit of Wolf potions, it is pretty inexpensive. The Locket, however, does not have that luxury. If you want to buy back a Locket from a vendor, it will cost you a casual 10,000 platinum for each Locket. That means if you want to buy a melee bind in the future, you are looking to spend about 20k just for the recharge costs alone, and then probably a 1 or 2k tip for the owner or owners of the Lockets. This is quite significant because high-end raiding guilds will want to have a lot of their melee characters bound outside raid areas for quick mobilization. Reptox is actually bound outside of the Temple of Vishan for this exact purpose, and because of the significance of that bind, I doubt I will ever change his bind location. In the future, I would love to have my own Locket, for the purposes of binding myself into the Plane of Mischief on my monk. Number 7. The Blade of the Black Dragon Eye. To the untrained, this item at first might not seem that special, but on closer inspection, this weapon is actually insane. The ratio is the same as the Warrior Epic, and the Envenomed Breath proc is an absolute monster for warriors wanting to generate threat. The sword is essentially a Vishan's Peak strength weapon that drops in a pre-raid dungeon from a level 55 frog. And it can be traded. The only thing that's missing is stats. So the sword drops in Old Severus of Froglock Reet Knights for the first 7 months or so of Kunite, and after that it does get replaced with the Blade of the Green Dragon, a slightly worse ratio and no proc. The Blade of the Black Dragon is moved into Vishan's Peak and turned into the Sword of the Shishar. The ratio is slightly increased, and then some stats are thrown onto it. The difference being, this is an endgame raid zone where some of the best gear in the whole game drops. So people lucky enough to get their hands on one of these pre-nerf will find themselves with quite a valuable item moving into the future. Number 6. The Circlet of Shadow. Have you ever played a Shadow Knight or a Necromancer in Kunark? Then you probably know what this item is. The Circlet of Shadow drops in the Temple of Droga off of the goblin bodyguards that spawn in the room surrounding Chief Rockgus. And, like many of the items on this list, it's not so much the stats that are what make it stand out, but the functionality that it brings. This item has an instant cast, self-only invisibility spell, and you can click it from any slot in your inventory. You do, however, have to be a Shadow Knight or a Necromancer in order to use this, but this mixed with the toolset that those classes already have makes it almost a must-have item, especially for Necromancers. Do you have a whole bunch of mobs on you that you need to get rid of? Feign death, wait for them to reset, instant invisibility. Solo charm killing down in Howland Stones, need to efficiently and instantly break your charms? No problem, instant invisibility. This item was replaced with the Circlet of Shadows about 6 months into Velios on the blue server. The Circlet of Shadows is the exact same except the invis cast is 5 seconds instead of instant. It still makes this a nice item to have because not needing to use a spell gem or spend mana to cast invisibility is great, but this is still a significant nerf to the item's utility. All of the previously dropped circlets do remain in the game unaffected, making them a very valuable item to hold onto into the future. Number 5. The Holgresh Elder Beads. Alright, so if you've ever watched one of my streams on Twitch, you know all about these beads. The Holgresh Elder Beads drop off the Holgresh Elder in the Awakening Lands, and they're removed from the game about 6 months after the launch of Velios. The Elder Beads have utility purposes for almost every class in the game. However, for monks, they open up mechanics that don't even compare to anything else in the game. It's almost akin to opening an entire new set of skills and abilities. The intricacies and nuances of the monk-elder bead relationship are so vast that I could dedicate an entire video to the item alone. On face value, it is a very simple item. It can be clicked from the inventory slot, and it can cast a low-level mage spell called Eye of Zom. Some of the more simpler utilities that the Eye of Zom adds are as follows. You can attack your eye to proc the OT hammer. Necromancers can life tap the eye. If you shrink down and squeeze yourself right up against a wall and then cast Eye of Zom, it will drop through the world and end up back at the zone entrance. This is extremely handy in zones such as Temple of Vishan, Dragon's Necropolis and Sleeper's Tomb, as it allows you to either click the exit portal and zone your character out, or invite other players who are waiting at the entrance to a group so that they can be summoned down into the depths of the dungeon. If you cast the eye and then move it flush up against a wall, you'll often be able to clip your vision through that wall, giving you sight into areas adjacent, above and below you that would otherwise be blocked by line of sight. For any mobs that cast Harm Touch, you can more often than not eat that Harm Touch by aggroing the mob with the eye, which frees up a huge amount of health that would be otherwise drained from your character. But, as stated previously, where the beads absolutely outshine all of this is in the hands of a monk. The utility that the Eye of Zom brings to a monk that is scouting, pulling and splitting mobs mixed with feigned death is unmatched. I was silly and I told myself that I'd never get my own pair, and I gave up before I even properly attempted to camp it on my own. I can say without a doubt that my biggest regret in the entire journey of playing Reptox through Project 1999 is that I did not get my own pair of Holgresh Elder Beads. I am very fortunate enough to have some amazing friends who have allowed me to borrow this item during periods that they did not need it. I've always had to stress when people see me using this on my stream, the beads aren't mine. I'm only being given the privilege of using them by people who were smart enough to camp them while they were available. These beads go for a cool 350,000 platinum nowadays on the blue server, and that value will only rise as less and less of them remain in circulation. Number 4. The Manastone. The Manastone. The item that in my opinion seems to be surrounded by the most controversy. The Manastone drops from the Evil Eye in Lower Guck, and it is removed from the game when the Soul Row patch goes live. All existing Manastones in the game will remain usable. A very simple item that drops off a very simple mob. The Manastone is an offhand that's usable by all pure caster classes and bards. We can't forget about the bards. Now the item's got no stats, but it has the effect Mana Conversion, which converts 60 hit points into 20 mana. Now at first glance, this at least to me doesn't sound very good. But this is an instant cast and it's clickable from the inventory, meaning that some classes, it's absolutely broken. So clerics have complete heal, they can spam click this until they're almost dead, then heal everything back. Now I'm not a big caster player, and I'm probably one of the worst people to talk about hit point to mana conversion ratios, but from the people who I know who have used the Manastone, they tell me that it pretty much breaks the game for certain classes. And the fact that the remaining Manastones in circulation on P99 Blue go for close to 1 million platinum, I am inclined to believe them. This item is so broken that it didn't get nerfed into a lesser version of itself, but instead got completely removed from the loot table. Also, the item is only usable in classic world zones, meaning if you're in a zone from Kunark or Velios, you can't use it full stop, the game will just not let you. But restrictions like this never stopped clever players from finding ways around them, such as druids and wizards who can port to a classic zone, click the Manastone until they're almost dead, and then gate back into their expansion zone. Number 3. The Fungus Covered Greatstaff. What can I say about this item? It drops off the Myconid Spore King in the depths of Old Sebolus. It's a fungi tunic that you don't have to wear. It's usable by all classes and all races in the game. I do believe that the fungal regrowth effect when cast stacks with the fungal regrowth effect that is worn, meaning that if you have a fungi tunic and this staff, the regen will stack onto itself. The only downside to this staff is that fungal regrowth as a cast effect applies a snare to your character, so it's not really good in terms of mobility, but the fact that it's instant and free, and you can do it whenever you want, means that it's pretty much irrelevant that it puts a snare on you. You just click that shit off when you want to move, and then you recast it again when you stop. This item is absolutely buku bananas broken, and that's probably why it got nerfed 2 months or so into the release of Kunark and replaced with the fungi covered greatstaff, which, let's face it, it's equally as good, but only druids and chamois can use it. On P99 Blue, I would say that the pre-nerf fungi staffs that are still in circulation are probably in the top 3 of the most valuable items on the server. I'm talking like 2 mil minimum. Number 2. The Guise of the Deceiver. Of course this was going to make it into the video. In my opinion, it's one of the most iconic nerfed items in the entire game. Everyone knows about the mask that bards and rogues can use to give themselves the Dark Elf illusion, The Guise of the Deceiver drops from the Ghoul Assassin in Lower Guck. Before its nerf, this item was actually clickable from the inventory by any class race combination in the game. For the most part, people just want this for cosmetic purposes, but it does hold some serious practical values as well. Large races in particular can really benefit from this. It's basically a spell that allows them to shrink, especially handy in classic dungeons that ogres, for example, would really struggle to squeeze into. Provided your character is either agnostic or worships the appropriate gods, the Dark Elf illusion will give you access to Dark Elf areas without being kill on sight. Now that night blindness is such a big thing on green, you can bet plenty of people are going to want to get their hands on the mask just so they can see in the dark. Dark Elves, of course, being the only race in Classic that gets Ultra Vision as a racial bonus. Cool factor, obviously, let's face it, Dark Elves are one of the most popular races in many RPGs, EverQuest is no exception. Having the ability to change into a Dark Elf no matter what class you're playing, it's enough for most people to want to get their hands on it. The Guise is replaced with the Mask of Deception, which is only clickable by bards and rogues, and that will be when the Soul Row patch goes live. Alright, so before I get to number 1, here are a few items that came close but didn't quite make the list. Number 1. Water Loot. Sorry if you feel like this is a cop-out, but the number 1 spot on my list goes to all of the loot that's dropped from the waters in Sleeper's Tomb. The factors surrounding these items make them some of the most prestigious and rare items in the history of the game. Alright, a history lesson for those of you who do not know. The waters are 4 dragons that guard the imprisoned Keraferm, the Sleeper, at the very bottom of the Sleeper's Tomb. Now, the Sleeper's Tomb in itself is an endgame dungeon that requires a key to enter. In order to get this key, you need to kill one of 5 endgame raid dragons and loot their talisman. You then have to sneak into the dragon's necropolis and hand this talisman in to jailed Dar's Shade. Oh, did I mention that he's behind a locked door? Well, a 210 plus lockpicking rogue can open this for you, but if you want your own key to the door, that's another quest in itself. Now that's just 1 key for 1 person of your raid. Now go and do the same thing for another 40 or 50 more people. Cool, now you have a raid force keyed for Sleeper's Tomb. Fight your way through the tomb, killing the 3 giant golem guards and all of their trash along the way. These guys drop primal weapons, by the way. Make it all the way down to the bottom, and you can now fight the 4 warders that guard the Sleeper himself. These guys drop some of the best loot in the classic timeline, full stop. That does sound time consuming. What makes it different from Vishen's Peak, which also requires an entire raid to go through an arduous process in order to enter, you might ask? Well, as long as 1 warder remains alive at all times, the other 3 will respawn like any other normal raid target. But once all 4 warders have been slain, old Keraferm, the sly dog, will awaken, break out of his prison, and rampage through the game world, killing everyone and everything in his wake. Until he makes his way into the depths of Skyshrine, he kills Jelinek, and then he despawns. Once this has happened, Keraferm and all of the warders will never spawn on that server ever again, meaning that the items they drop are gone with them. So, the lucky few people who were in a guild competitive enough to reach the waters and get their hands on some of this loot before them or another guild awoke the Sleeper, now they not only hold some of the best in slot items in the game, but some of the rarest and most prestigious items ever to exist in the classic timeline. And that is why I have put them at rank number 1 on my list. Alright, that does it for this one, folks. Are there any amazing items that you know of that I might have missed out on? Why don't you let me know? If you enjoyed it, go check out some of the other nonsense that's on my channel. Stay tuned for some more potential videos at some undetermined point in the future. Cheers.